Hi everyone, welcome to Off the Podium. I have a special guest from New Zealand, Joe, and he'll introduce himself. Joe, welcome to the program. Thanks for being here. A little bit about yourself.
Oh, no worries. Thank you very much, Tigran. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thanks for asking me. So I'm Dr. Joe Harrop. I'm a violinist. I also play viola. I have a couple of particular focuses in my work. One is the performance practice and pedagogy of chamber music, but also by sort of wider association ensemble, so ensemble technique, if you like. And on the other side, I have part of my career has been in the sort of social activity within music. So, if you like, social action through music, primarily through heading up a program in New Zealand called Sistema Aotearoa, which is inspired by the Sistema program in El Sistema program in Venezuela, of course. So those are my two sort of areas of work. But I'm based in Auckland, in New Zealand, and living here with my family, and it's great.
Yeah, and you went from Royal Academy of Music, right?
Yeah, I have a PhD from the Royal Academy of Music. I was one of the very first to graduate with a PhD from a conservatoire.
Yeah. Which,
for those people who've spent some time in the UK, know is a sort of a paradox, if you like. However, the PhD program there, it's sort of under the auspices of the University of London, but that's very much part of the PhD is negotiating the sort of the Scylla and Charybdis of performance on the one hand and academia on the other.
Mm-hmm.
But contrary to sort of popular belief or what you might first expect, there are so many areas, common areas, and also areas of crossover. And for me, that's where the exciting bit starts, where you find that academic work, as it were, and in performance meet. I've just been had a chapter published with OUP about, student performers primarily, and how they engage with so-called academic studies, that being analysis, history, etc., etc. So I co-wrote that with Celia Duffy, who I used to work with up at the what is now called the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland.
Well, it's just great. It's great to see that you went from Royal Academy of Music. Someone hears about the name, you think the person who graduates would go on to have play maybe in orchestras or kind of have more of a performance career. But it's great to see someone with your level of background, high level of performance, wants to give back to the future generations.
No, I know what you mean. It's what's really fascinating about getting into academia. I mean, I was very much a dyed-in-the-wool performer, mm-hmm. and then I did my master's degree at the academy under an amazing, fantastic figure, a lady called Amanda Glauert, and she took over the master's degree course there after Larry Dreyfus, who's also an amazing performer, scholar, if you like. So that sort of inspired me to look at the academic world of music academia, how it applied to me and what I wanted to do with my music. And coming back to New Zealand to work on Sistema Aotearoa, I found that the sort of the tools, the analytical tools that I had built up over my PhD, looking at ensemble technique, primarily string quartets, was a massive help when it came to things like devising an effective curriculum for group teaching and mass group teaching, up to 70, 80 kids in one go, and still getting effective technique, effective teaching, but also social outcomes that we're looking for as well. And I guess it's one of those things of when you engage in analytical thought and also you study to be better at it, those facilities stay with you and you can apply them in many different contexts. But because the teaching of these young kids, and we're talking about absolute beginners, kids who've never even seen or heard of a violin before, being able to engage with them and teach them the basics of technique as a group effectively, was very interesting to see the similarities between how to teach a student quartet effective ensemble technique, and then learning the instrument as an ensemble. Yeah. There are more common areas than one would think. Yeah. So it was tremendous fun to look at that and to get into it in that way. So what would at first seem two sides of a coin, beginners to learn to play the violin or cello or whatever, and then on the other side looking to bring a student chamber music ensemble from an undergraduate level up to something approaching professional. There are more common areas than you think, so it's not sort of separate.
Yeah. Well,
when it comes to teaching, anyway.
2 questions come to mind. First, why New Zealand? I know that your background is you were born in New Zealand, weren't you?
That's right.
So coming back home, but why? Why from UK to New Zealand? Just what's the reason?
It's interesting. As a New Zealander, I'm a New Zealander of mixed ethnic background. I have Samoan ancestry, which is a Pacific Island, Polynesian ancestry, and of course, Auckland is the biggest Polynesian city in the world. There's more for example, there's more Samoans in Auckland than there is in Samoa, and so I've always had I've always been homesick. When my wife and I were in the UK, I was in the UK for 15 years, and my wife for almost 10, and we were always homesick. New Zealand is a very special place, and particularly with regards to a mixed culture. I mean, we have what we call the tangata whenua, which is the First Nation here, if you like, to use another term, is the Māori people, and that gives our country a very distinct identity, and the way in which we are dealing with the post-colonial situation is unique. It's also world-leading in many ways. But I'm getting off point.
No, it's
the
great.
The thing is that's a very dear place. Yeah. And going over to the UK and seeing things over there, the wonderful people, particularly in the music world, the amazing facilities that are there, resources, are just mind-blowing. And so I really enjoyed my time there, and also the opportunity to work. I was lucky enough that my wife has a British passport, so I was able to stay there and work there. And working with not just amazing personages like Roger Norrington and all these. For example, we played Yehudi Menuhin's very last concert. We played that where he took the string ensemble at the Academy, but also working with the craftsmen that are London freelance musicians. These amazing opportunities and experiences you have where you get together where out of the 70 people in the orchestra, 30 people might know each other, but suddenly we create this sound like we've been in an orchestra forever. I had a wonderful little story to tell you. It was towards the end of my master's degree, so I've been in the country 2 years and got a bit of the network going to get the gigs while I was studying. And this fixer, the fixer is the person who organises the orchestra, calls me up. And I was in the library. I was reading a contemporary account of a trumpeter from Handel's time who was living in London. And I was reading this particular contemporary account. It talks about this trumpeter was a fixer as well. And that he wrote on a certain date, woke up and had my coffee and went to the public house and drank a pint of wine, looking to organise an orchestra for the weekend or for Saturday night's performance. But I can't find a violinist for love nor money. It's like, okay, my mobile phone went off in the library, so I jumped up and took off outside, answered the phone, and he says, "Oh, there's a chap on the end," and I goes, "Oh, such and such here. Can you do a gig on Saturday night?" And he said, "No, I said to him, "No, I'm already booked." And he goes, "Oh gosh, I can't find a violinist for love nor money." And it occurred to me, then I was like, well, actually, I'm part of a venerable profession. I'm a London freelance musician, and this has been going on since Handel's time, and it gave me a tremendous amount of confidence and happiness in a way, because in New Zealand, being a musician is seen as a second-rate job. You sort of got taxi drivers and musicians are kind of the same thing. However, when you think about taxi drivers, I mean, the tradition of taxi drivers in London, or New York for that matter, it's an institution. And so anyway, so I thoroughly enjoyed London, and I finished up as head of music at Falmouth University. I got a job, like I said, at Royal Scottish, and then went from there to Dartington Dartington College of Arts, when it was then incorporating with Falmouth University. And then when it incorporated and the college moved significantly west, about 2 hours west of its location where it had been there for decades, a number of the staff left, and there was opportunities to come up, and so I stepped up to the challenge of being head of department. And then I got a call. I got an email from an old friend in New Zealand. That's the other thing. There's very few musicians in New Zealand. We all know each other. And she was aware of my Polynesian background. And by the way, where Sistema Aotearoa is working, where it's active, is a heavy concentration of Polynesian cultures. Okay. And so she knew of that, and she said, "Look, there's a job going at home. You should really go for it." And she told me what it was. I knew about sistema from Scotland, from what happened in Scotland, and also from El Sistema and of course the Simon Bolivar performance at the Proms. It was around that time. It was all going off. So I said, oh no, yeah, okay. And then she gave me another email. She said, no, you really should. And I showed this particular email to my wife, and we started talking about, what would happen if we went home. And of course, there's plenty of opportunities for musicians, and particularly musicians who are academics and performers in the UK. It's a growth area, and not many people can handle both worlds. But of course, there's not many jobs like that at home here in New Zealand for musicians, and those people who have those jobs usually stay in them for a long time because they're great jobs. So we talked about it, and so I ended up interviewing and taking the job. So the reason why we went back to New Zealand primarily is for the lifestyle. Also, broader issues like we are aware of that our childhoods. My wife's a very successful corporate marketer in the technology field, and she did very well in England as well, not just in London but also in Cornwall. And so we realised that a good childhood put us in a terrific position to do well as young adults, then on as adults. And we wanted that for our now three children. We had two at the time, now three. Added to that was my wife is part Jamaican. Her mother is Jamaican, and her parents left England because of the racial tension that was going on there. And so that's why they chose New Zealand, because in New Zealand we are a bicultural country, first of all, Māori and Pākehā. Pākehā being white European who've lived here for a while, or whites with European background. And then we are a multicultural society after that. So we're officially a bicultural country. But of course there's heaps of cultures living here. Having moved from London and Glasgow, which are cities which are great and have lots of different kinds of people, to Devon and then Cornwall, which is somewhat monocultural, we realised that we wanted to raise our children in a place with lots of different people, and this opportunity we really couldn't turn down. It was also a great chance to come back and reconnect with friends and family back here, which has been amazing. So that was why we moved from London, or I should say the UK to New Zealand. We still miss the UK terribly, and not just the silly little things like decent English beer and good cheese, but we really miss things like the resource, the way people at the top of their game in the UK, how they behave professionally, how they work, the cut and thrust of not just in music but also in business and academia and that sort of stuff. You don't get that here in New Zealand because we're the last stop on the way to Antarctica, man. So anyway, there's positive negatives, but really we moved back here for our kids, and whenever we sit around after we put them to bed, they're 10, 7 and 4, and we'll sit there having a cup of tea at night and sort of going, well, why did we leave the UK? I'm thinking, oh gosh, there's all this stuff going on. We keep in touch through social media and things with our friends in the UK. And then we look out the window, and we've got the sea on both sides. It's a 5-minute drive to the most beautiful beach you've ever seen, and my parents live just down the road. That's the answer to it. So a very dull and dreary, non-musical answer to your question about why we moved back to New Zealand.
Well, for those who don't know a little bit about the El Sistema program, briefly, if you can, also, and I know this is a big question. It could take days to answer, but what does a first day at your program at El Sistema when you used to teach look like? Just some ideas of what it looks like with 70, 80 kids or a large number of kids. What does it look like? I mean, I don't even know where to start. I conduct youth orchestras, and it's already tough to organize that with kids who actually play their instruments. What does it look like with kids who don't even know what a violin is?
Sure. Okay. So, I can give you an answer in two ways. I can tell you what happens practically on a day at Sistema, Aotearoa, and then I can tell you why it happens that way, or the context around it. So nothing happens in the morning. Usually we would. This is 3 years ago now for me. Nothing would happen in the morning. It would be meetings and paperwork, etc., etc. There might be a bit of work going on in schools because we would have already, because we've been going a couple of years already. So there might be some of our, what we call tutors, which are essentially our instrument teachers, but we call them tutors. Some of the tutors going into school and giving their kids a first musical experience. So that's half an hour with a class, no selection, just a classroom full of kids who may or may not come to sistema out of school, because we work in and out of school, but the main instrument teaching was at that point done out of school in a community hall, in a community setting. So sort of neutral ground, if you like, no particular school. So there might be some teachers out there giving the kids some first music experience. This is a violin, and this is the instruments of the orchestra, and do, re, mi, and we learn Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, do, do, so, la, la, so, etc., etc. Tars and tay-tays for their, crotchets and quavers, or quarters and eighth notes.
Okay.
So that's all good. That's what might be going on during the school time. In New Zealand, that's effectively 9 a.m. till 3 p.m. Come 3 p.m, we would be ready in the community hall with the different spaces set out for teaching. So there may be music stands if the kids had progressed to the point where they were reading music, or if it was a younger bunch of kids, because we sort of bunched them 6 to 7, and 7 to 8, and 8 to 9, 9 to 10. So in the biggest space there might be, like you say, there might be 70 or 80 seats put out, all with a violin tuned next to the seat. If they're really starting out, they might have the wooden violins, what we call whisper instruments, which wooden cutout instruments we managed to get a really cool bridge designed with a little gutter in it for the stick to go on and stuff. So those sorts of things. So those are all fairly obvious things that would go on with any activity where you're going to have a lot of kids coming in. The cool thing was the kids would come in one door at one end of the sort of complex, and there'd be somebody there to tick them off the list, because they had their name on a list. Yes, they're here. They would then go to a table and get their name tag, which they have their name like that, and they'd find their name tag, and then they would walk down just the way the building was constructed, a longish hall, at the end of which was a door to the main complex.
Mm-hmm.
And at that door would be either myself or one of the tutors, and we would greet that child by name. So Polynesian names are quite hard to say, so all our tutors had to practice them. So it might be, they like to say something like, "Hello, Mea Fau, how are you today?" And Mea Fau would say, "Hello, Dr. Joe, I was Dr. Joe," or it might be, "Hello, Fire Ros." Fire is a term of respect to a woman. And so that interaction had to happen. Even if the child just whispered it under her breath, or his breath, fine, in they go. So already that child is learning to interact politely and respectfully with people, and also being respected themselves. And there might be you usually would high-five it, because nobody shakes hands when they're young. And in they go, and they get a couple of biscuits, a piece of fruit, and a drink. And there'd be a little relaxed time, and then everybody would be greeted, and off they go, split up into their different activities. Whether it might be one playing cello, and then they might go and have a go on violin, or it might be that they have 20 minutes of again first music experience, and then they might have 20 minutes of instrument, and then maybe 20 minutes of choir or something like that. Just always keeping the variety going. Mm-hmm. So the kids don't sort of settle into too much of a rhythm, other than we get there. The rhythm, once we get there, we have to behave ourselves, we get fed, and we get to do some cool things with our mates. And this used to happen 3 times a week. It's different now. The structure has changed, and there's a lot more teaching in schools, I believe. But the whole thing for the beginners is they come in, they realise they're in a safe, secure environment where they are respected. They get to meet people that they might not be able to meet in their own sort of family or immediate social circle. Different people who do different things, different kind of role models, and then they go home. They get picked up at home, because we insisted that they get picked up. And these are children who would usually either walk to school and walk home, unsupervised. Kids who are 5 and 6, which isn't that big a deal, but it's not really in New Zealand. It's not seen as ideal, even though a generation ago everybody did it. Mm-hmm. What you've got to remember is that we were, or it still is, it's quite different to El Sistema in Venezuela, and we were initially inspired by it, and also inspired by Sistema Scotland, and a lot of the stuff we did was borrowed from them, but we developed our own way, primarily through myself and the then coordinator administrator, a lady called Ros Giffney, who's now managing the program. We realized very early on that the music was simply the hook. We were very much social development and social outcomes first, music second. So every minute that child was under the Sistema Aotearoa roof, we would try and pack as many opportunities for social development and personal development for that child. So from the very first step they have into the building, where their name is ticked off and they find their name tag, their name is pronounced correctly. I mean, I asked you how you say your name.
Yeah.
As for a speak. How many times have you had your name? Hi, Ty Graham. I mean, if people don't realise that, people whose name is Peter or whatever, maybe they do if they go and live in Spain, they might pronounce it properly, incorrectly. However, having their name spoken correctly by someone with a white face as opposed to a brown face.
Yeah.
And then they get fed, they get to have fun, they do something very much different to their brothers and sisters or cousins. And then after a time, plenty of opportunity to perform, anything, they get to show their parents, their aunts and uncles, their cousins, what they've learned. So we engineered the environment to maximize those outcomes. And, it works brilliantly. And it's very difficult to quantify and to capture data-wise. And this has been one of the big problems with sistema programs all over the world, is how to capture and analyze the data. If any, it's usually hugely biased and skewed and manipulated to try and get the maximum outcomes in terms of funding, etc. like that. Yeah. But that's just what it is, because when you're dealing with children, I mean, New Zealand has dreadful statistics around domestic violence and child abuse. One of the worst in the developed world. And so what we're doing, even though it's a very strange sort of left field approach, we could, as I've said to you, it's actually quite easy to sell in a way, and I use that word in a neutral sense because you can see as soon as you explain what's going on in the music lesson, or what's going on in a standard sistema day, and how different that is to that particular child's, or that typical child's everyday life. I mean, the statistics around Māori children, something like one in five are going to be abused, and every 1 in 5. These are not exact figures, of course. I mean, you can look them up, but very shameful statistics for New Zealand around domestic violence and child abuse. And of course, this has a knock-on effect in a social sense, because that child will then grow up to be violent, to commit crime. It's 105,000 New Zealand dollars a year to keep someone in prison. The prison situation in New Zealand has a Māori face. It's ridiculous, hugely overrepresented in our prisons, and it's. That's a lot of people say it's because the whole justice system is institutionally racist. That may well be the case, but that's a longer story. That's an outcome of colonialism, and you see that in other countries as well. However, in our own small way, and this is because we came in contact with Ros and myself, would go to these workshops where you would have a reformed and a guy who used to beat his wife and was a gang member and a dreadful person who's been reformed and is now speaking. It's part of what's called It's Not Okay. It's a campaign here in New Zealand, and it's just a way of getting men and women to admit what they've done and to come to grips with it. And going to that and going, well, coming out of it with tears streaming out of our eyes, because it's so harrowing, and realising the depth of the problem, and saying, what can we do? What can we do? We're just, Ros is an organiser, a youth activity organiser, a genius at that. I'm a musician. What can I do? And then you look at what we do and say, okay, well, what is going on here? What is happening when that child has an interaction with a teenager who is doing something so different to their big brother or their big sister, who talks to them in a polite, respectful way and insists that they are spoken to in a polite and respectful way. And they get this 3 times a week. That's 40 times a year, about 40 weeks a year. So, and along with that, they get taken on great trips to town and perform on big stages where I tell them, the Beatles played on this stage, and they go, who are the Beatles? But you see what I'm saying? And we realised that fairly early on. Ros and myself, and then another lady who came on who worked a lot in London in England within schools, a lady called Jo Hedge. But between the three of us, we sort of really sharpened the whole practice around Sistema Aotearoa into something very effective. And I'm very proud of the work we did, and the fact that it's still going on. I mean, we've probably had well over 1,000 kids through the program. we've still got maybe 30 or 40 from the original 100 who came in 2011. We've had a number of them get scholarships to some of the top schools in Auckland, full scholarships, and primarily through their music. However, these children, and this is on the anecdotal evidence of their teachers and some analysis of the school reports of children that are achieving at an acceptable level and those who are not. The teachers generally said the kids who were going to sistema were at an acceptable level more than those who weren't, but there's so many factors involved with that, so it's a difficult one to actually push forward with any certainty. However, the fact that music's such a visible thing when you learn it, if you learn a tune, you get up and you play it, as opposed to sort of, maybe there are other things, but the notion of performance is really important in showing what you've learned. And one more thing before I finish talking about this particular thing, we've been very successful in Sistema Aotearoa. We've presented it at the International Society for Music Education, amongst other Sistema programs, and it was clear that ours was world leading in many ways, particularly with regards to cultural awareness, and that was where I think we've sort of done well, but also we've had a relatively easy ride. And I'll tell you why. Because in Otara, where Sistema is based, is primarily Pacifica, Samoan, Tonga, and Cook Island, these Pacific Island, South Pacific Island communities. The children are raised in a similar kind of way, and they all have similar strengths. For example, learning strengths. Pacific Island kids generally are kinetic learners in a way, or they have strength in their learning, very quick to learn things physically. They develop physically very early on. They're big people, but also not just across their sort of large gross motor skills, but also fine motor skills. So in Polynesian society, you'll have a kid who's a really good rugby player or netball player, which is female basketball or something, at a very early age, very physically accomplished, but also they'll be able to make the most beautiful, fine flax mats at an early age. So ideal for playing an instrument. It's amazing. As a culture, and I say this as a part Samoan myself, we like to be around lots of people, family, friends. We do things as groups. We don't function effectively or as effectively as individuals. And I'm speaking incredibly generally here, but that comes from the notion of whānau, which means family or wider family. Your cousins are the same as your brothers, your uncles are the same as your mum and dad, or in Samoan words that is ainga. And so Sistema was almost made, or the way we moulded it was particularly for these kids, because they're learning with their friends. You'll see them get their instruments out and just sit in a group and play, off the top of their head, the arrangements, and they love the multi-voice arrangements and stuff like that. But ask them to get up and play by themselves, no. Only a few of the kids will get up. And those instances where we did that, we had to be very careful how we created the environment that the kids were feeling they're playing for each other. They're not playing as a performer. So there was a cultural bent within the Pacifica communities that sort of helped. It was there. It was very fertile ground, if you know what I mean. So there's the long answer to you.
Well, that's good. That's good. I love these long answers. There's so much to learn from this, especially about things that I don't know about. Well, anyways, New Zealand scene as far as orchestra, classical music, conservatories. How does that look? Because I don't know much about that either. I do know that there's an orchestra in Auckland, right?
Yeah. Sistema Aotearoa was and still is operating under the auspices of the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra. Now that is it's a professional orchestra. However, the players aren't on salary, and it's not an uncommon thing. But they can go and do their teaching and stuff as well, and it's slightly more favourable because, for example, the tax situation here in New Zealand is much more favourable to self-employed and small businesses. So anyway, the Auckland Philharmonia. The Auckland Philharmonia, I would say, is one of the best in the world in its outreach to communities and its community activity, and has been for a number of years. It was primarily through the work of a lady called Lee Martelli, who is their outreach, what they call their connecting, head of connecting, but also through the fantastic ambition and drive of their CEO, Barb Glasser, who was very much behind getting the Sistema Aotearoa program going. I mean, you look at what, for example, the LA Phil does. Well, the APO does as much, if not more, and better than the LA Phil, in my opinion, on half the budget, if
wow.
not.
Wow. This is great because it's really great because I love seeing professional orchestras, not just professionals, orchestras in general, thinking about the future and doing these projects. Well,
this is the interesting thing. Because in New Zealand we have a sort of a tension, and the tension is between accepting that we are at the bottom of the world and quality-wise we are always going to be struggling on the one hand, and on the other hand saying, well, what actually have we got here and what can we do? When I was at the Philharmonia, I would talk a lot around the table about the orchestra being an institution rather than an orchestra, an institution.
Yeah.
And what are the resources there? I mean, the players, they range from, ex-Soviet trained on the one hand to people who've never left New Zealand. And everything from players who love getting out there and playing for the community and playing for kids and, playing silly arrangements of various pop songs and stuff, and thinking that's great for the orchestra, to, on the other hand, absolutely dyed-in-the-wool orchestra musicians who only really get heated up when they get a spectacular conductor coming in and down and doing Richard Strauss, for example, and everything in between. And that's fine. But what I believe the Philharmonia is an example of is an orchestra for the 21st century.
Yeah.
I mean, they've got their kicking and screaming, with lots of people, because it used to be a player-owned and run orchestra, so it's transitioning from a player-owned and run orchestra to a more, usual administration and player structure. But finally, I think 2 years ago they had a concert where the upper balcony was a social media zone. So people who wanted to tweet and record, and so anybody who wanted to do that, they could do that. They had to go to the upper balcony where nobody else would be disturbed by them, and they could do that during I love that idea. Yeah. It's like, imagine live tweeting during saying, oh man, the oboe just played the most incredible solo, and percussionist clammed it. Gee, this conductor is great, but I really don't like his tailcoat. Whatever, That for me is cool. And they visit well over 500 schools in Auckland, and they cover, over 2 years, they cover the full geography of Auckland's a very big city, spread out. And they cover the whole of, they go east, west, north, south, and do community concerts in the bigger halls. And that's the full orchestra, not just the small orchestra.
Wow.
Or chamber ensembles. So really proud of the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra and what they do. The interesting thing is that you've got the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra. Auckland's the biggest city, and then in Wellington, our capital, which is more in the centre of the country as a whole, we have the New Zealand Symphony Orchestra. So we have a national orchestra, which is one of the very few national professional orchestras worldwide. Most of them are city-based orchestras, and the players there are on salary. Generally, that's not to say that the players are any better or worse, but they get a lot more money from the government, as in almost 4 times more. And of course, because players are on a salary, and I used to play with the NZSO myself, the musicians, it's a job you want to go for, because you get security, you can buy a house. Wellington's a beautiful place. It's a very small city, but it's a great place to hang out. The orchestra green room looks out over Wellington Harbour. It's just beautiful. Yeah. It's beautiful. And it's a great place too. So there is tension of a sort between the two institutions, but it's now got to the point where everybody realises that we have to get along, and they're doing some good work together. Yeah. I was hoping, coming back from the UK with rose-coloured glasses, that sistema Aotearoa would be the thing to sort of break through the sort of regionalist thing which happens in New Zealand. I guess it's everywhere where you have a scarcity of funding for any area, not just the arts. But it's did to a point. For example, we had Nicola Benedetti come down to play a solo with the NZSO. We shared that resource, and then we got to go and meet her, and then these sorts of things. Yeah. But it's getting better. But in terms of work, that was the biggest challenge of setting up Sistema Aotearoa. Was I got here and I thought, great. I had my London freelance muso hat on. I'm like, fantastic work for musicians. They can come and teach these kids. We'll give them all the resources they need. I'm not coming out to Otara. It's, it's 2 hours on the motorway, or I've got all my pupils there on, we teach them after school and they come to my house. It's like, who wants to work out there? And in the end, it was funny. It was the same. Sistema Scotland said this as well. A certain kind of person comes to work in a Sistema program. When I went and visited the Sistema Scotland program for the first time, we visited a couple of times, there was a bassoonist there who I recognised who was just a monster bassoonist. He was in London, I think, and then he moved up to Scotland. But he was known around as the session bassoon player. He played bassoon in the in Harry Potter films. He was an absolute monster. I was like, what are you doing here? And he says, this is the only teaching I do. And he, obviously, you can guess the reasons why. He loved the novel approach. He liked the group teaching thing that had been so, very thought through. There's a lot of group teaching isn't thought through. Yeah. We ended up getting a lot of young people. Some of our people who came on as volunteers, student volunteers, stayed on and eventually became employed. So it was very much an organic thing. But that was one of the freaky things. So there's, what was great was when these mums would come to me and say, look, Junior is very good at league. So this is rugby league, which is like a football. It's a bit like American football. Actually, Canada's very good, but that's not Seattle. Sorry, cut that bit out. But yeah, so the mums would come to me and say, is there some job prospects for Junior? At the moment, we're looking at having him concentrate on sport. And I was able to say, well, firstly, yes, music has so many potential career pathways. And secondly, I can actually say it with some authority because I was looking for musicians to come and work here, and they've all got work, And that comes from a scarcity of musicians on the one hand, but also there is a demand for private music lessons in terms of school kids. We have a large Asian population here, China, Korea, and of course Chinese, Korean, Japanese parents, they recognise the benefits of a child learning an instrument, and they insist on it. And so there's a lot of work there. That's just one particularly sort of cultural focus there. But also we've had a huge explosion of instrumental teaching in schools, particularly in our private schools. And, so we pay, and a rounded education, which includes arts, is seen as a very good thing and is sold as a good thing in the private school sector. Public school as well. There's some excellent public school orchestras as well. The better ones, the more in demand. But that happens primarily. I believe that explosion in school music has come about through the fair trade agreement we have with China, where we can get some really good instruments cheap. Yeah. Like buying a violin down here is cheap now, and so suddenly we have access to instruments. We've got musicians who are willing to teach. Schools who want their students to teach. I adjudicated it at it's called a festival, but it's really an orchestra competition, a school orchestra competition a couple of years back, and the standard of playing, not just individually but as orchestras. And I went to talk to the tutors afterwards, and I congratulated them. I said, look, I could see the people right at the very back of the second violin. And this is like second violin section with 14 desks of huge orchestra. Wow. And playing, seriously, one of the best renditions of the Dvorak New World I've ever heard. Wow. That whole freaky thing where the tempo moves forward and rushes back, and it's organic, and I was like, wow. And I said, look, the people sitting right at the very back of the seconds, playing as hard and as passionately as the leaders. They can't even see the leaders, and yet they're the same. And the tutor says, oh, we've worked, thanks for that, we've worked so hard on it. So, it's funny you talked about the Academy, Royal Academy of Music turning out orchestral musicians, but those are the simple things that don't get done now and don't get taught. The simple orchestral rules, if you like, or orchestral things. However, so there's work here. There's work in the bands. There's work in the orchestras. There's lots of cross-cultural stuff. At the moment, I'm in cross-discipline stuff. At the moment, I am playing viola in a string quartet in the Auckland Theatre Company's production of Amadeus. And it's really, really funny because I had a mate come over, and he and his wife were playing in the National Theatre in London. In that production, I said, well, we're a bit different than you. It's a string quartet plus a rock band. And the arrangements are fantastic. I helped a little bit with the scores. I didn't do any arrangement. I just helped prepare the scores. And the introitus from the Requiem with two shredding guitars and a killer drum kit and two keyboards and a string quartet and horns. Man, it's really cool. It can stand that treatment.
I was going to ask you about the quartet. I did read about that. Anyways, all this talk about education makes me think of the parents that don't find music education important. What are some things you would say to people who say, well, they could be doing better things, or music, what does it give you? I don't want my kid to have a music career because it doesn't pay well. Even if they don't end up doing music, what does music do for a young person? How does it help them?
Yeah, well, if I was talking to a parent, and I have talked to lots of parents like this, what I've found is a parent who's thinking in those terms of what does my child need to succeed, we're already on the same page. We're moving in the same direction. And I can say to that parent, well, you want your child to be good at maths, for example. Music is a wonderful way of learning maths, particularly fractions and subdivision, all that sort of stuff, great. Is your child a visual learner? Is your child an oral learner? Is your child a kinetic learner, a physical learner? What are their learning strengths? And they'll usually say, oh, he's very good artist. So I say, well, he's a visual. Okay, fine. What this means is that we can use that visual learning. So we teach them, how to read music, and that will develop the other areas of learning because they have to. They'll develop their oral learning. They'll develop their kinetic stuff. Oh, my child's not very coordinated. It's okay. Music will help their sense of rhythm, which, there's a lot of research in dyslexia and dyspraxia now that's around rhythm.
Yeah.
And, of course, that can help that sort of stuff as well. It helps concentration levels. My child won't sit still. Well, I guarantee your child will sit still when it has a cello and 5 of his mates around him and they're blasting Pachelbel's canon. They're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
They're staying right there.
Yeah.
They're loving it. And so I don't have a problem selling an instrument in terms of learning. Professionally is another story altogether, but that's when you start to talk about different career paths. And this was a discussion we would have quite a lot because sport in New Zealand is huge. Massive funding for sport in New Zealand. And, the career paths for sport are player, administrator, coach. I'm sure there's more. I'll probably get rude phone calls from sports people now, but maybe mental skills coach, these sorts of things. As opposed to music, which takes you into so many different areas. We could list all the potential career paths. However, music takes you into it in a very organic way, in a way that you can get to a place and you'll end up, like, for example, I'm here in the theatre, and last night I met someone who played in an orchestra with me in 1994. I haven't seen it. This particular person is now a playwright, and I'm looking to work with a writer on something. And so suddenly this is a project which might happen. And so the career path is a slightly more complex one. But in terms of selling music as an aid to child's development, it's not a problem. There are safe environments. Orchestras are generally very cool, safe environments for a child to grow up in. I grew up in youth orchestras. All my best friends are from youth orchestras. You can play up, you can be an idiot, you can make your mistakes, but you're generally always supervised. Yeah. You can't get up to too much trouble. Well, I'm sure there are plenty of musicians who do. But, you're busy. You keep yourself busy. And it's doing something cool. It's making art. I feel music's very important. Of course, it's not for everyone, We can't get on our high horse and say, look, every child must learn an instrument. I think it would be nice if every child had the opportunity and was taught in a way to make the most of that opportunity. Because let's face it, there's some really crap teachers out there, or crap teaching, I should say. And that's the interesting thing is it's not always the person; it's just the way they are teaching. And if we talk about group teaching, I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. We got it down in sistema. We got it down because we kept getting asked this question about how much does it teach, how much does it cost to teach, and we worked it out that for a half an hour lesson, it costs $5 New Zealand dollars. And that's nothing. The majority is $30, $40 for half an hour. $5. And I think that would have been, it's actually overestimating it. So I think there's economies of scale there that can be done to help more kids learn.
Well, before I forget, I want to thank Des Oliver for recommending you. Because it's a great recommendation. I just loved hearing about all these things, and surprisingly close to 50 minutes has passed since we started our conversation, and it just flew by pretty quick. One of the things I actually want to know about before I let you go, things that you like to do outside of music, because we as musicians are known to just spend so much time in music, but in reality, we all, to some extent, have hobbies or things that we are passionate about and we do outside of music. Are there things that you do? Other than, of course, the 3 kids, I understand.
I have 3 kids to look after. That's all I do. And I try and squeeze some music in there as well. It's, I mean, Des is my man, He's a great guy. And we really connected at the Royal Academy of Music. I played some of his impossible music that he wrote back then. What I was going to say was, it's interesting. I've had 2 situations now where I've had music performance taken away from me, or I've moved away from it for one reason or another. Sistema being one of them. I don't think you can count playing Twinkle Twinkle on a Half-Size Violin as performance, really. So I have a deep appreciation of how special it is to play music to a high level, what a privilege it is to play Haydn Opus 33 quartets to a level where you really understand them and they sound good and people will pay money to come and listen to you. It's a huge privilege. I remember having, and I'm just getting off the track, but I'll come back again. I remember having an argument with my father when I was 15 years old, and I was playing a Brahms sonata, and I just said, look, so many other people have played it better than me, and what's the use? I can't, And Dad said to me, he said, well, how many people do you actually think have actually played this sonata? Do you reckon it's in the millions or in the hundreds of thousands? And we worked it out that since it had been written, it's probably still in the hundreds of thousands. Mm-hmm. Maybe millions. But, not that many people play classical music. Mm-hmm. And so from that sort of thing, my brain started working, and I realised, well, actually, no, it is. And it took the situation where I did not perform for a number of years, and that's two situations like that happened once when my first child was born, and then second when we took on sistema. To realise that to play music to a high level, and even to engage in music at a high level, whether it be composition, analysis, whichever, is a privilege. It's a huge privilege. And so now when I'm playing music, there is a palpable frisson of this is something very precious to me. And I've talked to some other people who've been through a similar situation, and they feel the same way. They realise just how important it is to play music when you've had the chance, and you must take it again. So in terms of hobbies, I mean, I look after my kids. I adore rugby union. I'm a huge follower of it. I used to play it very well as a child. In fact, when I busted my arm when I was a kid, I had to make the decision between violin and playing rugby. Wow. So when people say, what made you play the violin? I say, rugby. I was forced to make a decision at a young age. I like to ski. I've been skiing for snow skiing, so I love to ski. I love to cook, of course. My wife works full time, as it were. She's the main breadwinner in our family at the moment. When I was at Sistema, it was the other way around. She worked part time and watched the kids. So we've had that little role reversal thing, and that's cool. That works really well. So I'm really thoroughly enjoying the gift of being able to look after your kids. Not everybody has the choice. Yeah. And we've got a house here which has got a garden which needs to be looked after. I'm not very good at that, but really. It's funny because I think if you were to ask me what is it what you do and which is your hobbies, I would say, well, actually, I'm a stay-at-home dad who looks after the kids and who writes about music and teaches. But my absolute passion, it's not a hobby, it's a passion, is performing on the violin and viola, and primarily with other people as well, and chatting with them. So it's an interesting way. Hobbies would be a nice thing, but it's every opportunity I get now, I play and I perform. And it didn't used to be that way. It used to be it's this burden I bear, But no, it's a privilege and it's a vocation and it's all those things. But I absolutely adore playing music now in a conscious way that I didn't before, because of life. So.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for joining me. It was great having you. I hope
no worries, Tiga.
I hope you come back and we talk more about this. I had a great time chatting with you about all this. And thank you to Des Oliver for recommending you, because it was an absolute great recommendation.